All right. Good morning, everybody.
Good
Thanks for
morning.
joining us. Hey, Carl. How are you?
Hi, Mark. Good morning, Internet land.
Yeah, I like it sliding in sideways. All right. So, as I mentioned on LinkedIn, you and I have a tendency to be loquacious. Love that word.
Great word.
so, so I'm going to jump in it. So, just as excuse me, just to set things up. So, Carl and I wanted to talk about observations over the year, what we've been finding. And, it's funny. I think I can say this to you, Carl. It's funny when you said, I'm going to do all this deep research. I'm like, you have people for that. But I think you love digging into this stuff. So I'm very interested to see what you've come up with because you know this space. So with that, I'm
It's
just going to
great.
go straight for it. So what have you found? What have you discovered?
Well, we live in this world every single day, Mark, and it's like a lot. It's almost in some ways you and I, and a company like Corero, we are like emergency room operators, and we can't always see some trends. I mean, we'll see certain people coming in and out of the ER. We'll see certain situations that look pretty bad, but picking your head up and really being able to assess, is this getting better? Is this getting worse? Do we have the right tools and so forth? So I think that, there, in any professional run organization, I think you really have to spend some time really figuring out whether or not you're tooled correctly, whether or not you are the battle that you're fighting is the worthy battle of fighting, right? So, yeah, I was looking back at this year, and there's just a lot of amazing events that happened. Let me just just start out with this. I remember getting onto the Azure platform about 5-6 years ago, and I remember somebody asking me the question about, well, what's your disaster recovery plan if Azure goes down? And I thought to myself, well, if Azure goes down, certainly it's a bigger issue than my company or my instance or my little piece of Azure and so forth. And I guess I'll just start it with saying Azure's gone down 3 times this year.
And there you have it.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, there are a lot bigger problems out there than, I'd like to dig into this, but I'm generally not the guy to say the sky is falling and so forth, but it's been raining pretty hard, this year, and we'll get into that. So, depending on how you want to look at it, Mark, I don't know how you want me to dive into it, but I've done a review of by month what was really bad, by industry what was really bad, by how many people in the world this year decided to announce that they have dealt with the largest DDoS attack that they've ever seen ever in the world. And almost every single month in 2024 was a different vendor or a different company. Literally 1 year ago, maybe we'll just start right there. 1 year ago, almost to the day, 364 days ago, AWS came out with we just fought our biggest DDoS attack that we've ever seen. And that was kind of the klaxon call for the rest of what's been the rest of the year. And going into Q1, we had Cloudflare, as well as a couple other companies, suggest that they had first ever 2 terabit attack. And this was in the January-February timeframe of this year. And then moving throughout the whole year, it just climbed and climbed and climbed. By mid-year, Cloudflare actually announced another doubling of the attack to 3.8 terabits. Microsoft announced a huge attack actually that went on during that same period of time. In November, just like 5-6 weeks ago, South Korea, the country, said that they had against their government the biggest DDoS attack that they've ever had to deal with. And they believed it was coming from North Korea and from Russia. And just a few weeks ago, NS Focus said that they dealt with their first 1 terabit attack, and Akamai also the same period of time said that they dealt with a 900 gigabit attack. So if you go through this year, no matter how you're looking at it, by region, by attack type, by type of vendor, by type of governments and so forth, it has been extremely dirty out there. And I think if you've been able to survive 2024 largely in good shape, it means either you haven't yet become part of the target list, or you're just out of the lane of fire at the moment.
Right, right. Let me ask you about that. Yeah, a couple thoughts come to mind, I guess, because once winter rolls around, I'm all about the weather.
Yeah.
But it makes me think of like, the biggest, this is the biggest, and they keep getting bigger. It's almost like, when you get your first cold snap up here in the Northeast, it's like, oh, it's cold, it's freezing. And then by February, it's like, it's old news. It's like,
30 degrees above zero is actually pretty warm, right? It's 30 degrees warmer than now, right? That kind of thing.
I was saying, supposed to we're getting lows of 4 this weekend. But what was I going to say? You mentioned something right when you began about Azure, and I wonder about this, about being out of the line of fire. And even I'd like to get your thoughts on, sometimes people are they're not targeted, but if Azure goes down, you weren't necessarily the target, but if you're using that service or Cloudflare or whomever, gets attacked, so it's not even being a target. It's just, I don't know, wrong place, wrong time. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I like to sit back for, a second when we start these conversations and just talk about the value proposition associated with service availability, how we take it so much for granted. And it really shouldn't be taken for granted. It's almost like life support. As you know, I used to be a military aviator, and life support systems, especially if you have to egress the aircraft, are just that, right? They will save your life or support your life during terrible times. And they're not meant to take lightly, whether you're on oxygen or something like that. They're meant to be redundant. They're there for a purpose. The availability of services is fundamentally the life of businesses, right? And it's what's really interesting that's happened, I think, over the last 2 or 3 years, Mark. I don't know if you have the same thing. If you go around, like this is the holiday season, so if you have casual conversations at parties and so forth, you'll find some of the most amazing things coming out of people's mouths about what do they want to do when they grow up, about what professions they're currently in, or what are their aspirations, goals, or ambitions are. And you'll hear things like, I want to be a YouTuber. That's what I want to do for my profession. Or I want to write stories for Netflix episodes, or I want to start a software company that does this, that, or whatever. Or it can even get even more mundane. I just want to be a doctor, or more normal sort of. I want to be a lawyer and so forth. But all of these businesses today, whether they're new businesses or old businesses, they fundamentally require for revenue the internet to be up and available. Right? It's just simple as that. Even sports stars, this is the most amazing thing, have in their contracts today things like you have to have so many likes, you have to have so many followers, you have to do so many posts. Even if they're not esports people, right? Because they want engagement and so forth. And part of their bonus structures are focused on all these things. If the internet's not available, these ambitions, these aspirations, these hopes, these businesses just simply don't exist. It's the life support of these businesses, right? But how many people are really taking this seriously? Like you would be taking oxygen systems in a shuttle, or life support systems on a plane seriously. They're really not. So, I start with that premise because when you go through what's happened this year, you get a feeling as if the threat is real and the systems are not set up for it. Right.
Right. So let me ask you, because there's something you said when we were prepping for this, I think it actually made it in the copy for the description, you know, where's there smoke and where's there actually fire, I think,
Yeah.
or I got that all wrong, but you get where I'm going with this, you know,
Yeah.
what's the noise versus the reality here. And as, you know, companies and organizations are trying to prep, I mean, have you come across like what's noise? What's the reality that organizations have to take into consideration?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. It's a great question, and I'm going to be a little countercultural here because I think some of the ways we measure these things, it's even I am guilty of using the numbers that come out of vendors, things like 3.8 terabit attack or 4.2 terabit attack and so forth. And is that more fire than or is it more smoke and so forth? And the truth is that the measurement of attack types and sizes and good measurements are not easy to come by, right? So, and the size of the attack doesn't always result in the problem, actually. And so small packet-based attacks are more easily fended off so long as they don't get to a certain size, and then they're not easily fended off. So I think that some of these attacks that have really driven a lot of the size are not relevant to most companies that are out there. So, for example, the HTTP2 attack, the novel attack is what they call it, a novel attack type, is really an attack type that's kind of focused on a cloud service provider. If you've noticed, the people that complain about these the most are always cloud service providers. They're CDNs, they are public cloud infrastructure. You don't find enterprises or IoT or government institutions or just normal websites dealing with these, because the attack problem and the nature that can get it to the point where it actually gets to such volume is really a service provider or a public cloud service provider attack technique. So it's more noise. It's relevant to those companies. Don't get me wrong. It's extremely relevant, but it's really not that relevant to most companies that are out there. And then there are these other attacks that are out there. Let's just take today that there's these DDoS attacks that are non-volume, but are hitting VPN infrastructure all over the world. And they're taking VPNs down all over the world. Very little is being said about it except to individual companies. Often the companies can actually lumber along up and available, except for their VPN infrastructure, which is often very interesting to them. I know legions of hospitals that have had to deal with this. And I know some folks that rely still today with nothing but VPN infrastructure. For whatever reason, this infrastructure, often offset from their internet normal core infrastructure, is under attack all over the world. There's real fire there, but not a lot of smoke. So it's a very interesting problem. It's very easily solvable, but people don't realize how much of a problem they have over on that. And it's mainly because nobody's really talking about it. And cloud DDoS companies don't see this. So part of the problem, Mark, a lot of this is like, you talk about the weather. I grew up in Metro New York, and I remember, I think it's still available. There was AM radio stations, 1010 News Winds Radio is the name of it, right? And you would get the traffic, the news, and the weather every 10 minutes, right? So every 10 minutes you would get it. And they had this ability to tell you the traffic in like 2 minutes. And you just had to listen really hard, and they would tell you the traffic so that you'd be able to avoid problems and problem areas and so forth. This optics side for DDoS is not installed in most companies. People just don't know. They don't know what's going on. Mm-hmm. They're flying blind. They just ride right into the traffic. They have no idea. They ride right into the weather. They have no idea what's going on. They're not trying to get a flavor for this, like you said, the weather patterns and the traffic patterns. So that's a part of the fire, actually, is there's a real problem with optics and visibility and understanding to be able to solve the problem across the board. People don't believe that there's a lot of value there. That's probably the single biggest place where you can place money and actually save a lot of money down the road. And the smoke is really where you're hearing stuff from cloud DDoS providers about layer 7 volume threats, which is what this is about. To get layer 7 at these levels, it really requires you to have cloud service delivery. And that's what most companies don't have. So most of that's not really real.
So when it comes to fighting these fires, I know something else that we've discussed and actually you wrote about a bit not too long ago was around the regulatory complexity, right? So we've got laws that are changing, data sovereignty. We're seeing data repatriation from cloud to on-prem and so on. So not to heap on everybody, but I mean, this is a concern, of course. So what is it like with these challenges? What do organizations need to keep in mind when it's coming down to managing this kind of complexity and still protecting themselves?
Now, a lot of companies are not thinking about this. A lot of individuals are not thinking about these issues. So there's a big law that was passed in Europe that I think in the US has gotten very little fanfare. Probably has, in my estimation, more impact than GDPR, especially for the infrastructure IT people. And it's called DORA. It's an Operational Resiliency Act. And it deals with this idea that the European Union is requiring certain requisite oversight of critical infrastructure and financial services to really put their money against resiliency. And this includes things like DDoS attacks, right, and uptime and so forth. So that law comes into effect on mid-January of next year. I think it's January 17th of next year. In addition, there are either laws or reticence to send data to certain areas of the world, right, to operate and so forth. But when people are procuring cloud DDoS services, they often are not aware where their either primary scrubbing facility is or where tertiary, secondary scrubbing facilities might be in certain routing infrastructure. And it may violate actually their current domiciled laws around where you can send data. So for example, if you live in Germany, certain data can't leave Germany. Same for India. Same for, frankly, in Canada. Canada doesn't like certain data leaving to the United States because of the Patriot Act. And of course, there are all sorts of issues in China and around China and so forth. So there's that reality on cloud scrubbing that not a lot of people appreciate. The second piece of it is the mechanics of routing certain attacks to certain regions is very, very difficult. So just because of geography and the way wires are led. Third, there are less wires, cables today than there were just 6-9 months ago, because 3 major cables were cut in the Baltics because of the war associated with Russia and so forth and so on. So a lot of routing actually starts to fall apart when you have these things happen. And there's been threats or depending which news reports you have, to undersea cables in and around the Saudi Arabian Peninsula and Yemen and so forth, right? So this idea of what is required by law, what should be done, domicile with data, and how and where it can be sent, and then the dynamic nature of routing, both BGP routes, so the ephemeral routes, as well as physical routes, the wires themselves or the satellites themselves, have all changed dynamics over 2024 and will into 2025. So I would suggest that if you've put something in place just even a few years ago, thinking that this will be a roof that lasts for 35 years or something like that, you've got a whole bunch of new testing and assessments to do, whether or not those things are going to work properly.
Right. Right. So I do want to get into that a little bit. We did have a question come in. So before we move on, I just want to talk about, so being asked specifically about us, how long it can take on average for a platform like us to mitigate a small attack. So I'm not sure how we're defining small or a layer 7 attack to prevent.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, in today's world, in cybersecurity attack mitigation, you can't put a 5-minute or even a 5-second solution in front of a 1-second problem. So our solution, I think many people know this, but our solution is generally detect and mitigate inside of a second. It's sub-second, right? At scale, it's certainly inside of, let's call it dozens of seconds, inside of 20 seconds, inside of 15 seconds. But any solution today that goes beyond 25 seconds, even beyond 10 seconds, is probably a non-worthy solution. Most attacks today are characterized as inside of 5 seconds at scale. In fact, we saw attacks just this month that had terabits of size that were on instantly. And I'm not talking about there was any ramp. It was just a blowhard, and then we're off again within 5 seconds, right? That's the attack sequencing you have. So your ability, if you're doing BGP flows, I should say net flows and BGP routing and announcements and swing, it's dead. It's a dead model going forward.
Well, and I'll say, just in response to this too, because it's our channel and we can talk about us if we want to. But you remember, actually, I think it was you forwarded an email you got from one of our service provider customers. We can't use all the adjectives he used in that email, not appropriate, but he was excited. But I mean, we had to tell him that he had actually had an attack because we were on it in seconds. They didn't even know there was anything going on until our managed service team mentioned it to them. So
that's the way great filtering should be, right? That's great filtering. You should focus on what potentially is leaking, if anything, and that's where you should focus your time.
Yep. Okay. Yep. So where I wanted to take this is, there's always going to be some practical takeaway for everybody. So yesterday you put up a blog post. Well, you've talked about the need for some regulation. Yesterday you had put up a blog post about the Interpol takedown of all those DDoS sites, and what I guess the realities of great that happened, but that you still need to prepare. So I think as you go into 2025, what would your advice be?
It's a little bit like a cops taking down a chop shop downtown Philadelphia or New York, and then suggesting maybe that the threat has been reduced because there's no longer those chops for your cars. And if you remember that, I'm old enough to remember days where some states didn't require auto insurance, as an example, or some states didn't require homeowners insurance, right? And today I think most people, if you say that to people, they just smile like that's just kind of ridiculous, right? And I think that this is where we are with DDoS, because if you sit back and you think about it, I made this case about availability being fundamentally a life support system for businesses, and in fact, ergo the economies of nations. Yet we are reticent to say, just like car insurance or homeowners insurance and so forth, that you must maintain a certain protection set of resilience, and that means technical protection set. You know why? Because there's no other place you can get it. It's simply not available anywhere else. You can't get it from the military, from the police. You can't call a cop and get protection. You can't get it from your government. You can't get it from your neighbor. You can't get it from your church. You can't get it from insurance. Insurance will give you money. They'll give you they won't give you your business back, right? That kind of thing. So if you want to protect yourself, if you really want to protect yourself, you cannot rely on you have to go get technology. And I would suggest that the day going forward is the more you need protection, the more you need varied approach, resiliency, redundancy, right? Redundancy in vendor, redundancy in tech and approach. It's just like anything else. I used to fly military aircraft systems. We had 3 redundant closed systems for everything that ran the system, right? Because You needed to have redundancy because the thing couldn't come down. And that's the same here. We should be going with this idea of diversity, redundancy. And the reverse side of that, Mark, is how many things do you do as a business that you've set up single points of failure, right? Let's just take a simple one. Most companies have one standard way that they do dual factor authentication. So there's no perceived need for a secondary dual factor authentication system. So if that dual factor authentication system goes away or fails or is not available for a period of time or ever again, what would you do? Can your people get access to your system?
Right.
I think not. Right.
Well, I think it's like the VPN.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly like this.
Yeah.
And, and people think to themselves, well, that means it's added cost. It is, but it's also resiliency in design and approach, right? So that's part of that risk system. So my 3 recommendations going forward as we move into 2025 is there's something I call it's the OAT process. You have to have optics. You must understand how to do routine risk availability, or we used to call them disaster recovery assessments or business impact assessments, and those are kind of old-fashioned and they have old notions. Business was slow. Today, everything's online and always available. You really need to test your fundamental DDoS solution. Like I think you need to, the FFIEC in the U.S. requires banks to do this on a yearly basis. But I actually think as good measure, everybody should be testing their DDoS solution. See, does it work against today's threats? Always and everywhere. Why and why not? What lessons were learned, right? So you need to have optics, you need to do the risk assessments, and you need to test, right? That's the OAT. Step 1 is eat your oats. Step 2 is put the implementation together. Make sure that if you have single points of failure, that you're properly suggesting and understanding diversity in vendor and approach, redundancy. Tier 1 operators have dual routers and dual router vendors in their environments for good reasons. Same idea. And I think your security vendors should be viewed in the same way. And the other piece of it is in single point of failure is a lot in the world of availability protection technology has been driven to be vendor locked in. It's been by design almost choreographed so that you are going to be locked in to a vendor. And the day has come to get rid of that, to get rid of that idea. That is really a boat anchor around your neck. So when that vendor fails, and all vendors will eventually fail one way or the other, nobody is omnipotent, you will fail with that vendor. It's as simple as that, right? So the third thing is really about vendor diversity and scalability. I believe the future is all about software, making the network do your detection, make the network work your detection, and make the network do the mitigation, not mitigation devices, but make your network actually do the scrub. And that's all achievable today with software.
Great. You just made me think of something, because I know you and I both have some DR backgrounds. I mean, you were at SunGuard. I've done exercises at SunGuard and Sterling Forest. And it's funny, you talk about that single point. We show up, we're all prepared to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
What was wrong with the tapes? When you check the tapes. Exactly. So you're like, oh, didn't see that.
Or one of the tapes was corrupted, and oh boy, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. I spent a lot of late nights watching cartoons waiting for them to get the tapes going. So,
and that whole heritage is gone with most of today's generation, right? But it's it's still relevant, don't get me wrong, but the operational resiliency testing element, Mark, when I went and did this research, I said, of the major outages this year, about half of them were DDoS and half of them were mistakes.
And why the air quotes on mistakes?
Mistakes are operational resiliency problems. CrowdStrike, didn't do QA. we can go through the lists of all these mistakes, but people suggest somehow human behavior was an acceptable failure route, right? And in my world of security, when humans make a mistake that can lead to catastrophic failure, that becomes the next weapon to be used by the by the bad guys, right? They just taught the world about how to take care of a whole massive infrastructure and to take it down, right? That's the new red pill or blue pill or whatever it is pill.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, Carl, thank you. I know we're at time.
By the way, 16 million attacks. Wow. 16 million DDoS attacks in 2024. By very good numbers by multiple vendors. There was launched 16 million DDoS individual attacks, not PPS and so forth. Individual attacks. Yeah. That's one attack for every 500 people on this earth.
That's amazing. Wow. Okay. On that note, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for joining and for your questions. And have a happy New Year, everybody. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you, Mark. Take care now. Bye-bye.